Grønn torsdag.
Okay, so we'll start this session, this webinar on the Middle East. And Fadi from Lebanon and I will be trying to lead us through the different subjects. Okay, so just to repeat a little bit, we are talking about Middle East in this session, Middle East, but we are not talking about Syria because that comes in the next session. And there are conflicts in very many countries in the Middle East. And we will go on with talking about the different conflicts later, and also the influence of regional and global powers in the different conflicts. So we'll start with Palestine, and which is seen to be the mother of all conflicts. Once that has been solved, I think that would solve a lot of other things. And not that I think that is anytime soon. But the history is it is linked to European history, Second World War, but also the Zionist movement in early 20th century. And when Israel was established, the UN defined the area and accepted, in a way, the foundation of Israel. Israel announced independence and a state, but without defining borders. And that is quite interesting. There are not many countries which are not defining its borders. And they have not done it later. And one theory is, of course, that has been very conscious, that whatever is the line of control today can be the borders tomorrow. And so, but then there have been some times when the optimism has been much stronger than today. And when we remember back to 93, 94 with the Oslo agreements, the Oslo agreement was really a process. It was not, they didn't solve the main problems with East Jerusalem, the refugees, and also the settlements. But at the time, the settlements were quite moderate. Now it is 700,000 Israelis on the West Bank. But back in 95, 96, when Arafat and PLO leadership came from Tunisia to Gaza first and then to Ramallah, I was there at the time, and it was a very optimistic tone in general in the area. Both the president and the parliament, PLC, were elected in a reasonable way, and they started to function, obviously with the leadership of Arafat and with Fatah being the biggest political group. Something happened then in May. Okay, in May 96, when there was a direct election of prime minister in Israel, and Netanyahu won for the first time against Peres with a very, very low margin. And I have thought that if that hadn't happened, if Peres had won, maybe the Oslo agreement the Oslo process would have gone on. Some others are saying it doesn't really matter what Israel is, what leaders are in Israel. The main goal in the long run is to take more land regardless. I am not sure about that, but that is at least a theory. And then Arafat died. There were two elections, national elections. One first to replace him, where Abbas won, in January 2005, and then in January 2006 there was a parliamentary election. And for that election, Hamas were running. Hamas didn't run in 96. And because of the electoral system, where there were half of those elected were from from first past the post or plural election in multi-member constituencies, which is a big advantage for the biggest party. And then half of them from list PR, list proportional. And Hamas won. I think it was 43% and Fatah 42%. It was a very close margin again. But because of the electoral system, Fatah won full majority in PLC. So had they gone for a slightly different system, had it been more proportional, Fatah would have been able to form government together with Hanan Nasrawi and PPP and other smaller parties. But Hamas did win. They formed government, and the international observers, like Jimmy Carter and Carl Bildt, they said, well, we have allowed them to run. We need to allow them to rule. But Sharon and Bush didn't agree to that, and they stopped the transfers. And then, it ended up with a conflict between Fatah and Hamas. Hamas then ending up in Gaza, Fatah on the West Bank. But it's not, sometimes you hear that Hamas won in Gaza and Fatah in West Bank. That's not true. Fatah won Rafah, for example, in Gaza. So it was really the war, the conflict that defined that. And then we know what has happened later. And Israel has continued to build settlements on the West Bank. And it gets more and more complicated to find a solution for that can last in Palestine. Many of my colleagues and academics, they have said for a long time that two-state solution is not possible anymore because of the map. But also a one-state solution with equal civil rights, even with some kind of federation, is very, very hard to see, and Israel would never allow Palestinians to have the same rights in a one-state solution. So it's really, really hard to see a peace process. There is now a peace agreement, as you know, and one of the last points is that there should be possibility for a Palestinian state, but it's very vague. And as I said, it doesn't include the West Bank. And we know that what atrocities are going on there as well. So it's really in a very difficult situation. So, Fadi, maybe you would add something here?
Yes,
Fadi?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you, Kåre. First of all, I would like to thank you for this historical overview. Let me first extend my sincere thanks to the Norwegian Green Party and the Lebanese Green Party for the opportunity to take a part in this important meeting. And thank you for joining us from across the region and beyond. Together, I think we seek to better understand the ongoing developments in our region, the Middle East, or more precisely the Near East, a region whose people have endured a long history of conflict, tragedy, and suffering, both in ancient and modern times. Here we are left to ask, is it the region's geopolitical significance? Is its abundant resource, or is it a burden, a curse of sorts that continues to cast its shadow over us? I think our session aims to explore how regional and international powers are shaping the current landscape of conflict, peace building, and especially to the civic space in the Middle East. With a rapidly evolving context in 2025, including recent conflicts and, may I say, wars in Gaza and Lebanon, understanding these dynamics is more critical than ever. And my dear friends, we are at a time where traditional power centers are being challenged, alliances are fluid, and civil society space is under pressure. Regional actors are recalibrating their influence while global powers are adjusting their engagements. Over the next few minutes, we will walk through key geopolitical developments, analyze their implications on local realities, and open space for questions and reflections. This is meant to be an engagement session. So we, Kåre and me, and I invite your participation during this Q&A segment at the end. Let us take a moment here to reflect on the key developments that have unfolded and continue to unfold in our region since October 17th, the famous date. The October 17th marked what became known as Al-Aqsa Flood. Operation in Gaza triggered a historic turning point. This development ushered in a dangerous and volatile phase, turning the region into a stage for continuous conflict. Secondly, Hezbollah involvement in what was termed the war of support for Gaza resistance brought further devastation and hardship to Lebanon and its people. The war between Israel and Iran added another layer of tension with far-reaching consequences across the region. Not to forget the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria and the unexpected rise of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham marked a radical shift in the country's power structures with wide-ranging implications for regional stability. Now here in Lebanon, there is mounting international pressure on Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah and reinforce state sovereignty has raised fears of either renewed Israeli aggression or war, or internal strife that could spiral into a civil war. In light of these events, we must ask, what roles are regional and global powers playing in shaping this reality? And more importantly, where do the people of this region, our region, stand? What role can and should they play amid these forces? With that, if I may, let's begin examining the strategic outlook of each of the key players shaping today's Middle East. First, let's talk about Iran. Iran remains a powerful yet controversial actor in the Middle East. Despite facing sanctions, isolation, or internal unrest, it has shown resilience. However, setbacks like Hezbollah's recent losses and the fall of the Assad regime in Syria have weakened its regional reach, especially along the Tehran-Beirut corridor and the so-called resistant axis. Still, Iran maintains strong influence in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen through its network of proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hashd al-Sha'bi, and the Houthis. These alliances allow Tehran to shape regional politics and deter rivals. Its strategy based on proxy influence, ideological resistance, and adaptability in times of crisis. Now, the nuclear issue remains a key concern for Iran. Since the collapse of the 2015 deal between America, the West, and Iran, tensions have risen, with enrichment increasing and talks with US stalled. A new agreement could ease tensions, but failure to reach one risks further instability. At the same time, Iran's growing ties with Russia and China provide economic relief and strategic support, while also shifting the balance of power of the region. As a conclusion for Iran, Iran continues to survive and even thrive through strategic adaptability. It balances internal challenges with regional ambitions, relying on proxy network, Eastern alliances, and crisis diplomacy to retain its influence across the Middle East. Secondly, let's talk about the Gulf states.
Maybe before you move on to the next, maybe we should have some dialogue on Iran.
Okay. Yeah, ready.
Is that okay, Fadi?
Okay, for sure it's okay.
Yeah, because Iran is, as you say, a very, very key player in the conflict in Palestine and obviously in Lebanon. They were in Iraq, of course, and also after the Iran-Iraq war. Iran is a very modern country, and the embargoes have led to them being able to develop alternatives, both in IT, and pharmacy, and so on. So the boycotts haven't been that effective. When I was there 10 years ago, they still flew, I don't know if they do that, but they had jumbo jets flying between the domestic cities, and they managed to get spare parts from Dubai and other places. But then obviously there is a violation of human rights in Iran, which is at times massive. And it's not easy for us to kind of influence that from outside. But I do think we can do more, maybe to work with the civil society in Iran. They have, obviously, they cannot always work in the open, but it is possible. And we may even, which I have done many years ago, invited groups from Iran to Norway or to the Seychelles, where they don't need visa, to have seminars on democracy and development. I don't think we can bring them democracy, but there might be a change that we haven't foreseen at a certain time. And then it's important to have skilled people in Iran.
Of course. Yeah, that was I was going to speak about at the end of my intervention, especially what we can do towards civil society and towards human rights. Is anybody want to discuss in the Iran matter? Have any opinion on the Iranian concept, or should I continue?
You can continue.
Yeah, thank you. For the Gulf states, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar especially. They have moved from passive oil exporters to active regional influencer, navigating between global powers and local conflicts. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia and UAE. They are balancing ties with China, Russia, and of course with the US, opening cautious dialogue with Iran after tensions in Gaza and Yemen, promoting themselves as stabilizing forces through diplomacy and investments. Let's go to Qatar. Qatar is playing a key role as a mediator in Gaza, Sudan, and previously in Afghanistan, using media and diplomacy to influence regional outcomes. Some domestic shifts in these Gulf states. They are pushing ambitious economics reform like MBS Vision 2030, focused on green energy, tourism, and technology. They are hosting major global events to boost the image and soft power. But there are contradictions. Despite global engagement, they face criticism for repressing dissent and limiting civil society. Their governance model combines modernization with tight control. As a conclusion, the Gulf states are now central power players, and we see their interventions even in Syria and in Lebanon as well. Their wealth and diplomacy give them leverage, but internal restrictions remain a challenge to their credibility in promoting long-term peace and openness in the region. But not to forget mentioning the acts of the Crown Prince toward more freedom there in Saudi Arabia. This is about the Gulf states. If there is any discussion for this issue, in this issue of the Gulf states. Let's go now to Turkey. Turkey plays a complex role in the Middle East, balancing assertive policies with careful diplomacy. Its geographic location and flexible alliances make it a key regional player. Military and regional role. Turkey maintains a military presence in Syria and Libya, aiming to counter Kurdish groups and influence post-war politics. Turkey played a critical role in weakening the Assad regime by backing opposition forces and supporting the new leadership that has emerged in its place. Turkey controls parts of northern Syria under a counter-terrorism narrative, securing buffer zones near its borders. Turkey diplomatic strategy. It acts as a mediator in global and regional crises, helped broker the Ukraine grain deal, and has offered to mediate in Gaza. It balances ties with Russia, NATO, Iran, and Gulf states, maintaining open channels with opposing sides. Strategic balancing. Economically tied to the West, but strategically aligned at times with Russia and regional powers. Turkey uses this position to maximize influence while avoiding rigid alliances. Domestic politics. Post the 2023 elections, nationalist politics dominate, with Erdogan consolidating power. Domestic rhetoric shapes foreign policy, especially on refugees, Kurds, and regional identity. As a conclusion, Turkey acts both in a regional stabilizer and disruptor. Its role in Syria, flexible diplomacy and balancing act between powers positions it as a central player, but its success depends on managing internal tension and maintaining regional credibility. Let's go now to Israel. Following the Gaza war, Israel now is facing growing, let me say, isolation and internal unrest, challenging its regional position and domestic stability. Let's go to the key dynamics. First, regional pushback. The Gaza war, heavy civilian toll that damaged Israelis Israel's international image and strained ties with Arabic states. While the Abraham Accords remain intact, public pressure in Gulf countries is growing. Multiple fronts. Violence is escalating in the West Bank, while the northern border with Lebanon remains tense amid clashes with Hezbollah. Internal crisis, not to forget this matter. Deep political polarization has triggered mass protests over the war. Judicial reforms and civil rights calls for early election are rising as public trust erodes. International pressure. By the way, I did participate in two manifestations. Sorry, Kåre.
Sorry.
Yeah. International pressure. Increased scrutiny from the even US, EU, and the global bodies over military action and the human rights violation. Support from allies continues, but with more conditions. At a conclusion, I think Israel stands at a critical crossroads. While it maintains military superiority, it is facing unprecedented diplomatic isolation, internal dissent, and regional mistrust. Its future role in the Middle East will depend on how it manages both domestic reconciliation and regional re-engagement, especially in relation to the Palestinian question. I think here with the Israeli concept, we have some to discuss something. If anybody like to say something about that, I'm ready to listen. Or should we go to the United States? Let's go for the United States. The United States remain influential in the Middle East, but is shifting from direct intervention to more balanced diplomatic role. It reduced military presence. US forces are still in region, but large-scale interventions have been replaced by partnerships and intelligence sharing. Shifts in priorities. The US focus is now on China, Russia, and the Indo-Pacific. And now we heard about Venezuela. The Middle East is no longer the top priority, but remains important due to the ties with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf. Active diplomacy. The US is engaged in Gaza ceasefires, in de-escalation in Lebanon, and Iran containment through sanctions and alliances. As a conclusion, the US is not leaving the region, but redefining its role as strategic balancer rather than as dominant actor, while expecting partners to lead on regional security and diplomacy. Russia, holding ground despite the global pressure. Although distracted by the war in Ukraine and constrained by Western sanctions, Russia continues to maintain a foothold in the Middle East, mainly through its military presence in Syria. However, recent developments, particularly the fall of the Assad regime, have weakened its position. Russia retains key bases in Hmeimim, Latakia, and Tartus, ensuring a long-term strategic position on the Mediterranean. With Assad's fall, Moscow lost a primary ally. It is now navigating an uncertain relationship with the new Syrian authorities, seeking ways to preserve its influence under a changed power structure. Russia maintains coordination with Iran and Turkey, especially through frameworks like the Astana process, though its leverage has declined. Russia's stance on Gaza lacks clarity, and its engagement in the region is seen as limited. Some Arab states now view Russia as too preoccupied and economically weakened to lead. Russia is holding on, but no longer leading. Its influence in Syria is uncertain. Its diplomatic weight is fading some way, and it's shifting from an assertive power to a cautious, reactive actor in the Middle East. What about the EU? The EU remains a leading provider of humanitarian aid, development funding, and support for migration management, particularly in crisis zones like Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. However, its political influence remains limited due to internal divisions among member states and dependency on the US leadership for strategic and security decisions. It has expanded its role in supporting civil society, governance reforms, and green transition efforts, helping build resilience from the ground up. What more is needed from the EU to increase its impact? First, develop a unified foreign policy stance among member states to act more decisively on regional conflict. Increase political engagement, not just humanitarian funding, especially in peace mediation, conflict prevention, and reconstruction planning. Reduce reliance on the US leaderships by building independent strategy tools, example, diplomacy, defense coordination, sanction enforcement. Strengthen partnership with local actors to align aid with political and social realities on the ground. In summary, the EU plays a crucial humanitarian and developmental role. But to be a true geopolitical actor, it must overcome internal division, invest in political instruments, and lead on principled diplomacy in the Middle East. Thank you for now, and thank you, Kåre. It's your floor now. Thank you, sir.
Any comments from the audience? Yeah, Bente.
Yes, or is it possible to ask a question or just a comment now?
Both.
Both. Fadi, could you comment on the fact that now Erdogan has issued an arrest warrant on Netanyahu? He seems to be changing his mind kind of every second week. What is this a sign of? Thank you. Thank you.
What to say about this matter? Yeah, changing opinion each week is something not to be relied on. I don't know. Let's wait and see what comes in the future. Thank you, Benta. By the way, miss you, Benta. Thank you.
Me too, same here.
I would like to just make a small comment on Iraq. Obviously, that was the last time when US in the Middle East went in massively with troops and made a regime change in 2003. And Iraq was until then, of course, a dictatorship, and the leaders were from the Sunni minority. And there were three groups: Sunni, Shias, and Kurds. And as you know, the Americans, they didn't want anybody who had been linked to the Ba'ath Party and the administration to retain their jobs. And in the first kind of authorities which the Americans installed, Shias, Sunnis, and Kurds had the same number of, or a fixed number of seats. And there were ethnic also formula for the government. But after the first the new constitution, that was also removed. And what happened was, of course, that the Shias were in close contact with Iran, and the Shias are in majority, so they took over the government. And we know what happened, that they were extremely weak, they didn't have the support, and ISIS came in and established, and the history after that. But that was one example of the influence also of Iran in Iraq when the Ba'ath regime fell. And now it is really difficult to see any good solution even there. But I know you are interested in the Kurdish area, and they had, even at that time, they had parliament, or to be honest, they had two parliaments in Sulaymaniyah and Erbil, but they managed to merge that. So I think that is maybe the part that works best in Iraq. That is the Kurdish area. Yes.
I would like to raise a question about what to do. And as you have said, it's complicated. Still, we are already involved heavily in some areas, more than others. Economically, the European Union is the biggest trading partner of Israel. So we actually have some potential influence there, while the US is militarily and politically the biggest supporter. But also quite a few of the other states in the region, Europe is involved. We indirectly, I would say, support some of the authoritarian leaders by selling arms, for instance, without seemingly any conditions. But what do you, Kåre and Fadi, think we can do more of to support the development of some democracy, human rights, through civil society has been mentioned? What can we do more of?
Where, in general, or yeah, okay. Fadi?
Yeah, as I have, thank you for this question. As I have mentioned, what more is needed from the EU to increase its impact? I think, and this is something difficult for the EU, is to develop a unified foreign policy. As I know, and I thank all the EU states for their support to Lebanon and to the region, but as I know that there are different foreign policy stance among members of EU. Let's say Germany stands for Israel in a way. Norway stands for the Palestinian. We need first to have a unified foreign policy from the EU, and I think it's something so difficult to come up. But this will help us a lot, and to reduce the EU reliance on US leadership by building independent strategic tools. I don't know how the civil society or the Green Party of Norway or our similar Green parties in Europe can push for those key points to show the government there what is needed to be done. And I'm quite sure, due to my relation with the MDG, the Green Party of Norway, they are doing their best to influence their government to act differently. Thank you.
But I don't think we can pressure any authoritarian regime to change from outside. But I do still believe that we can do much more in support of opposition and civil society, and maybe also encourage NORAD to use more money on those kind of projects. In Europe, There are some obvious candidates for doing this, and we could do more in Middle East as well.
Not to forget Norek, by the way. Yani, it's me, Norad, anyway. I would like to benefit from the presence of Dr. Alouche and President Fadi Abi Alam to interfere in this matter. So our dear friend Dr. Alouche, I would like him, and if I may ask him to interfere in this discussion along with President Fadi Abi Alam.
Hi, this is Mustafa Alouche, and thank you, Fadi, for inviting me. Definitely, I second your brief introduction to the actors, concerning the actors in the Middle East specifically. And definitely, in case we really want to start solving problems, we have to start in a Descartesian method by pulling the threads one by one. But the best to start with is the situation in Palestine. It may be the most complex, but it's simple. Let's work at a human right level. Let's start from this. No one can disagree that every human on the earth should have the same right as everyone else. So it's obvious now that Israel is not only an apartheid state, it's more than this, because the way it's using it's a genocidal type of state that has proven itself to be not only over the last 2 years. In fact, if you go back even at the year 1948, it was the same, to a lesser extent, but the same mentality that has governed this issue. We still have 7 million people, 7 million Palestinian, non-Jewish in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in 1948 territories. So they are almost half of the population in what is called now Greater Israel or whatever. If we cannot apply the same human rights policies to everyone else, then everyone will question, even us as liberal, as supporters of democracy. Then we will have a very hard time convincing our population that this approach, the Western approach towards human rights, it can be applied unless you can force it in this area. And from there on, we can. We have lived through several eras, and all of the times, our dictators use the alibi of fighting Israel to suppress us. So let's start from there. Even the hegemony of Iran in the area was based also that the Palestinians are being suppressed and oppressed by the Israelis. So if we want to start by a beneficial, something which is probably that works, we should start with this area. Now is the right time, with all of the what we can see now concerning the support for a Palestinian state. I'm not very much enthusiastic about the Palestinian state because I'm not sure whether this survive or not. But definitely going at the personal level, each person has the same right as anyone else. So whenever Palestinians, Jews, Christian, Muslim, or others, or non-believers have the same right to live at that land, then things can be a model. The same way that Europe, United States, and everyone in the world used for South Africa during the apartheid period, this is much worse regime than the apartheid that was in South Africa. This is what I think can help to start building stable governments with democratic or some kind of democracy, and to stop the hegemony of our well, there are few now because Saddam is gone, Bashar is gone. Even in Egypt, they are trying to imitate some types of democracy, which is a mediocre type, but definitely going at that level and giving hope for people that democracy can help improve on their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Dr. Mustafa.
But do you think this is realistic?
Well, I don't know what is realistic. Was it realistic for South Africa or not? The other realistic issue is to have an apartheid state and definitely Israel is making everything possible to make a Palestinian state impossible. So,
but before this 7th of October events, I would have agreed with you that the most realistic is actually a one-state solution with equal rights, but with some kind of federation, which would protect also the two groups. But after these events, everybody is now talking about a two-state solution and a Palestinian state, which is also unrealistic. But maybe that is the most realistic of them after all, because so many internationally are actually accepting Palestine as a state now.
Well, I do agree. And if this is the beginning of a solution, this is great. But first, we have to convince the most radical, not only government, the most radical society that Israel has ever seen. In the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s, even in the beginning of the Zionist movement, there were much more moderate people. There were leftists, there were humanitarian Zionism. But now we have only the Jabotinsky type of Zionism, which is the narcissistic apartheid type of. So if we want to convince, we have to convince the Israeli society. Now, if you go to Jadon Levy, is the famous Haaretz columnist and a human rights supporter. He said that he haven't seen any worse society in his life in Israel compared to what it is now. This is why taking the issue of October 7th as an alibi not to give the Palestinians their right, we have to remember that history did not start in Palestine in October 7th.
We agree, but unfortunately we are running out of time because we have a new webinar in 1.5 minutes, and we're supposed to have a break in between. Nobody has a very urgent.
No, I would like to hear. I would like to hear President Abi Alam, if I may.
Okay, but thank you, Fadi. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Fadi. I do agree with whatever now MP Alouche just mentioned. The issue, it is not started on the 7th of October. It is actually a new era of violence, a new period of violence since from the very beginning, 1948, up till now. There is no way other than respecting rights, the self-determination right, human rights, and even the right of state to be independent and sovereign state. And here violating right, it is by itself the best way to fuel extremism. Fueling extremism coming from where? They are looking for us, they are looking for the Palestinians themselves and even for the Arab groups, wherever they are, exist within their states. Extremism coming from where? From not respecting at all any kind of right. Violating right is the best base, the best fuel for extremism. And here it is not the issue within Palestine by itself. It is also the destruction of all the Arab states. All of the, let's say, roots of this instability exist in the region, in every Arab state. In a way or another, they are affected by whatever is going on in Palestine. So the issue, it is not just internally Palestinian issue, it is an Arab issue, it is a region and even world issue. So the responsibility lies on everybody to do whatever they can, the same as now our colleagues in Norway, they are trying to contribute. It is an issue of, whenever coming to human rights, we are coming to a global issue. We are all together responsible for each other. And thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Fadi, and thank you, everybody. It's been a great discussion, and it would have been great to have more time, but we haven't. The bosses are behind me here, and they are pushing hard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meta. So we will meet in 10.
Grønn torsdag.